समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले. दिस इज द राइट टाइम.
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया.
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले. दिस इज द राइट टाइम.
अब समझा.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to a fresh new episode of Geopolitics with Swasti, where Swasti Rao, our consulting editor for strategic and international affairs, takes your questions, dear subscribers, on geopolitical developments around the world.
And on that, I have to make an appeal to all of you to become subscribers to ThePrint so that we can take most of the questions that you have in mind. So please do consider taking the subscription for ThePrint.
And at the outset, I would also like to mention that for every episode, we get an overwhelming number of questions, and we do try to accommodate as many questions as possible. If your question is missed, rest assured that we will take it in the next episode. With that, Swasti, we begin today's episode, and the first question is, of course, on the news doing rounds across geopolitical circles, which is Trump's tariffs and his comments on India buying Russian oil and how India responded to it. To begin with, Georgios Sira has a question on this, where he says that often it's heard that Dr. Jaishankar and Mr. Hardeep Puri say that they need to buy Russian oil because they are answerable to Indian people. Now, he wants you to throw some light on what is done with all the Russian oil that is actually imported from India. Is it used in Indian industries, and how does it help Indian consumers?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Devdatta, because in the last few days, I've been noticing that I think this particular subject is not understood well enough. On the one hand, it is usually interpreted as a political problem that India should not be adhering to anybody else's wishes when it is about India's trade, which is an absolutely correct thing to say and to assert, which means India must act in India's interest. But you know, the details of this oil trade are actually much more complex than what meets the eye, and therefore I thought that let me just take this opportunity that our subscriber has given to us. The total number of barrels that are produced every day remain by and large constant. You cannot dramatically increase or decrease, those number of barrels. So the world produces roughly 82.8 million barrels of crude oil per day, which includes the condensate, which is a kind of a gas that also comes along with the crude oil, and there's more detail to it, but I'll come back to crude oil first. Now, the top producers are USA, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. When it comes to India, the thing is that India requires about 5 to 5.5 million barrels of crude oil per day. That's our requirement. And out of that, about 88% we import because India's domestic production isn't as much. And India's domestic production with respect to how our economic needs has been growing has been falling. So many reports are existing where they have argued that actually in India we need a long-term strategy of also ramping up our domestic production, because otherwise India is a fast-growing economy, and you can imagine that 88% of that 5.5 million barrels that we require every day are actually imported. Right. And that is what explains why we continue to be so reliant on imports, and we continue to remain so sensitive on what is happening in the global crude oil market. Okay, it is because of that huge dependence. If we also had more domestic production, we will, in the same proportion, bring down our vulnerability to what is happening in the global market. But anyway, coming back to the main thing, India also has strategic reserves. And today, in about 3.5 years of the war, that percentage has gone up to 35%, which is a humongous leap. So now you know that out of the 4.83 million barrels that we import, 30% or to 35% of that is coming from Russia alone. And that makes Russia so significant in our energy imports. Okay, plain and simple. But why did we start buying from Russia? we did not start buying from Russia suddenly because we wanted to ditch our traditional partners. We started buying from Russia because Russia started to give us discounts. Why did Russia start to give us discounts? Russia started to give us discounts because the G7 had put sanctions on Russia for invading Ukraine and bring down its energy revenues. And that particular mechanism was referred to as the G7 price cap, where they said that you have to buy it within $60 per barrel, so that even though Russia will earn some money, it is not going to earn as much money as it would, because I told you that the global oil supply per day is by and large constant. You cannot make dramatic changes in it. And Russia being one of the top 3 producers, you cannot make Russia disappear, from that global supply, because it would create a huge earthquake. Okay. So coming back, that was the reason why India started buying oil from Russia. Now, it was not just India, it was also China that started, buying oil from Russia. The details of the discounts worked out for China are not yet known. It is in the realm of speculation, but we obviously know that China is getting more discounts than what India is getting. As far as India is concerned, we know that we got some discounts in the initial few months of the price cap. The price cap came into effect in December 2022, which is a good, I would say, 10 months after Russia had invaded Ukraine in February 2022. So, immediately in the aftermath of the price cap coming into effect, you did see that India got a good discount because Russia wanted to lure, more customers into buying its oil. Now, that said, we do not now know if the discounts were uniform all through the next 2 years, or did they change. So I'll come back to it. Now, when it comes to what India should be doing, it is going to be dependent on a few factors. And I have listed out about 6-7 factors for you to help you understand better. The first is, logic kya hai? Sasta mil raha hai. So discounts uniform hai ki nahi? When we started, we were getting a 30% to 40% discount. And those discounts were given on FOB basis, which means free on board basis, which means that I, as a supplier, I'm going to take care of the shipping, the insurance, and you will get it free on board, which is basically there is no hidden cost. Okay. Now, initially, when Russia was luring us into, that trade, and which made complete sense for India to go for, we were getting discounts on an FOB basis. At least that was what was reported. Over then the course of 2 years, we do not know where the discounts are. Okay. And we do not know whether we are still getting it on FOB basis or not. What we do know is that we are not getting the same discounts, because if you remember, when the EU, one of the last tranche of sanctions, when they landed up sanctioning an Indian company, which obviously Russia also had stakes in that company, the logic was that they were buying over the $60 per barrel, that cap. So why were they buying it over the price cap when, logically speaking, the discounts should have pushed the price further down? And that happens because after a point of time, we saw that we were also having to pay for surcharge and different hidden costs, which were earlier made free to us. So how uniform have the discounts been? That is a very, very important thing, and we still do not have clarity on it. Second, what we need to know about when it comes to India is that what is the currency in which we are paying? If you were to go on Google, you will get so many different kinds of reports on it. One report would say that we would do it in rupee ruble. Now, if we are doing it in rupee ruble, then why is it that only today's some of the reports are saying that the Indian refiners are saying that they would be paying Russia in dirhams? Why dirhams if rupee ruble is working? If rupee ruble is not working, then there is a question of millions and millions of rupees being stuck in Russian accounts and Indian banks. And what is Russia planning to do with it? Because Russia has to eventually invest it back into India to reduce the trade deficit, and we run a huge trade deficit with Russia. If not if there are also some reports that said that India is willing to pay in yuan. I mean, does it make any sense for India to pay in yuan? If India agrees to pay in yuan, it means that in order to stand up to Donald Trump, we are basically helping China strengthen its grip on de-dollarized trade. And is it in our interest? So we do not have any sort of data sets on how much of those orders are paid in what currencies. There is a bit of a hodgepodge out there, and a lot of details are also withheld. But it makes sense for India to either try and push for a rupee ruble trade, or in order to push Russia to invest the money back into India so that the trade deficit could be lowered. Remember, in the last financial year, our total trade with Russia was about $65 billion, out of which $61 billion was a deficit because of the oil trade, because we never bought any oil earlier, okay? So those are things that we need to keep in mind. Now, some reports say that in the year 2023-2024, we saved up about $25 billion, okay? But now, what we are saying is that if we were to pivot away from Russia, we might lose out on $9 to $10 billion. So what exactly is the correct amount? Because $25 billion is more than double of $10 billion. And then when you read those reports in full, you see that part of that money that India landed up saving, okay, was not because of only buying from Russian oil, but also because the global crude oil prices kept falling, despite all the problems in the Middle East, etc. In fact, as we are speaking, just in 2025, the last 6-month data shows that the oil prices have fallen by about 12%, okay? And finally, also, things about, is Russia indispensable for India? If you look at the MEA statement says that India is going to operate in India's interest, and India is going to do what is good for India. India has long-term agreements with many other, partners, and India is going to honor those agreements. If there are long-term agreements with Russia, India will have to honor those agreements as well. In fact, the MEA statement also puts out figures where they have said that that Americans and Europeans have themselves bought so much oil. So on what grounds are they actually pointing a figure in India? And if you get into the details, that those purchases have also happened, because of decades of their dependence on Russian oil, which they cannot diversify away from overnight. And the second being long-term agreements. The long-term agreements have legal provisions. You cannot cancel long-term agreements in a jiffy. You will have to pay cost for it, okay? And I can give you an example. Remember that entire kerfuffle around the Turkish, the pressure on Indigo to cancel its, contract with the Turkish Airlines. And remember Indigo refusing for it because there are long-term legal implications involved. So it's the same thing. If there are long-term implications, we will honor them and then perhaps try to diversify. In fact, if you look at the latest data figures, just in the days after Donald Trump actually came out with these statements, you actually see that Indians' imports of American oil have drastically increased, okay? And by proportion, Indians' imports of Russian oils have decreased from about 2.1 million per barrels that we were doing at one point of time. It came down to 1.8. So what I'm saying is that you will see all the structural adjustment happening, where the Indian the Indian companies, okay, the refineries and the Indian companies are going to make sure that they do not incur economic losses. Okay, is this not going to come from political statement here and there? Because please remember that political statement is one thing, but is the government giving any kind of a financial backup or a cover in case there is an economic cost incurred by these companies? If not, then basically the government's job is to stand up against this kind of bullying. But as far as trading per se is concerned, India should be operating in India's interest. India should not be operating as a reaction to either Donald Trump or Brussels or Moscow or Beijing, etc., etc. In India, the price of petrol in India has risen from 2022 to 2025. So all the years when we were buying the cheap discounted oil saying that it is for the end consumer, it has not really benefited the end consumer. In fact, I have the data. In 2022, the average price was 95 rupees per litre. 2023, it went up to 98 rupees. 2004, it went up to 100 rupees, and 2025, it reached 105 rupees. And then it got back to about 94.77 rupees. But that hasn't happened because of discounted Russian oil. That has happened because the crude oil prices have been steadily declining, despite all the problems in the Middle East.
Before we move on to our next question, Swasti, our subscriber Divya Reddy has a compliment for you, and she says that she loved your show with Surjit Bhalla, and she noticed how you are the only person who's talking about the actual issue related to tariff. Based on that, her question further is, Trump targeted BRICS nation as he and oligarchs fear fall of dollar and rise of the East, hence high tariffs on BRICS nations. What are your thoughts on this?
So thank you, Divya, for the compliment. In fact, it is a very good interview. I myself learned a lot of things because Surjit Bhalla, being Surjit Bhalla, is one of India's best known economists, and he's been the director for India at the IMF. So he comes not only with a lot of, I would say, knowledge, but also experience. And yes, thank you for the compliment. I think the bottom line of Surjit Bhalla's, points was pretty simple. He said something very important. He said that why is it that we are not talking about structural reforms? Why is it that despite change in governments, our industrial policy has remained the same?
Right.
Okay. Why is it that we continue remaining protectionist when it comes to agriculture and dairy? It's one thing to say that, we cannot open it up because, our poor farmers will not be able to handle the kind of dumping then that they will see on, highly subsidized and more competitive products from the US and elsewhere. But the question is, in 70 years, why haven't we done something about it? Okay. So his point is very simple. And it also relates to many other questions that were asked to us this time about, is aapada mein kya avasar hai, that, what opportunities arise in this emergency. By and large, see, we have to understand that all the international geopolitical rhetoric aside, we cannot go too far if we don't do the necessary structural reforms, the necessary industrial reforms. We have to look at why the FDIs are not flowing in India, why manufacturing is not able to grow in proportion to GDP. Because when manufacturing doesn't grow, what usually happens is that the figures tell you only half a story. Now, you may be exporting more to the West, but in order to export more to the West, you'll end up importing more from China. So actually, your dependence on a country like China is only deepening, not lessening. Look at the question of, we were just discussing the crude oil imports. Yes, it is true that he uses tariff not only as an economic tool, but he also uses tariffs as a political tool. And he weaponizes the entire situation with tariffs. So right now, whatever you see Donald Trump doing is actually somewhere, revolving around the same logic that he is trying to give a better deal to Pakistan to ramp up pressure on India. But what we need to be taking care of is that we need to cut a deal. And that is why you see that from the Indian government side, you did not see any bombastic statement on the tariffs per se, right? What we really lost our cool about was Donald Trump's exaggerated statements on Russian oil and oil purchases when they are also buying the same thing. And this is certainly no way to speak to a sovereign country. There's no two ways about it. Having said that, we remained very calm, and if they get lower tariffs and we get higher tariffs, our products will not be able to compete in markets, especially US being such a big market. And remember that we enjoy a trade surplus with the United States of America. So how do you leverage on these things? You have to keep calm and you have to negotiate. Doesn't mean that you have to give in to this neo-imperialism, but you have to keep calm and negotiate. But it is not tantamount to saying that it is the end of India-US economic ties, technological ties, diaspora ties. Come on, that's too much. Nobody who's serious has argued like this. But yes, there are alarmists everywhere, and the alarmists are constantly telling you that it's the end of the road. Donald Trump ke baad bhi America rahega. So we have to also devise a long-term strategy, but to remain firm is important. And to focus on internal reforms is important, and that's what Surjit Bhalla was mentioning.
Right. So then, Swasti, do you think that India should go for de-dollarization?
This is a very misunderstood concept, Devdatta. Why India should go for de-dollarization if it is resulting in rupeeization? What is happening by way of de-dollarization is strengthening the grip of yuan on that de-dollarized trade. So it's yuanization of that de-dollarized trade that we are looking at. We're not looking at rupeeization. And that is why External Affairs Minister has time and again come on board and said that there is no BRICS currency. Please don't think that there is a BRICS currency. India, China, Brazil, Russia, these countries that make up the BRICS, at least the core BRICS, of course, BRICS is now so many members. And that is very important to note. So when it is important to have a non-Western voice, and it is important to also engage, from India's perspective, to engage in platforms that promote that kind of non-Western, voices, because India believes in multipolarity. Okay, whether you support it or not, it's a different thing. But India officially believes in multipolarity. and therefore it is logical for us. But to argue that de-dollarization is something which is good for India, that's not the case. Don't buy such things. We are basically only playing into the Chinese design. You know how happy the Chinese must be with all that is going wrong for us. So I think it is time for us to also hold our horses and sort of think long term while remaining firm in the short term. And that is why there is really no getting away without this structural reforms.
Since we are discussing Trump, Narendra Arya asked this, that does India keep recordings of telephone calls with the US President Trump and other officials, or maybe similar recordings of DGMO level talks with, say, Pakistan requesting for ceasefire?
Okay, so a good technical question. I like these questions because they really help us understand the world around us better. Now, the US has something called a Presidential Records Act, where most part of the presidential discussions are made public after certain years. Sometimes people say it after 30 years, everything is made public. That's not really the case technically, because it's not necessary that every single thing is going to be made public. There could still be things classified, but they do have something called a Presidential Records Act, where most of these discussions are made public. Most of their phone calls, etc., are made public. Now, compared to that, we don't have anything similar in India. What we do have is a Public Records Act, which was enacted in 1993, and we also then have National Archives. But by definition, they do not entail that everything that is going on or all the calls that are being made are recorded and then made public. Now, there are some calls that are recorded. There are some calls that are not recorded. That is completely under the prerogative of the Prime Minister's and Prime Minister's office. So we really do not know much about it. That's one. Has India ever released the details of such prime ministerial talks or conversations with others? I don't think so. We have never really officially released. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, then I'm happy to learn. But as far as I know, we have not really released any such thing about some call with somebody. At least I don't know whether it's done. Now you talked about DGMO. Now, contrary to what I just told you about the political class, the DGMO level talks are always recorded.
Right.
Okay, they are always recorded. Every bit is recorded, but it's a different thing that they are not made public. Okay, now you can say, and I think that's where your itch is coming from, which is that if India is claiming that we agreed for the ceasefire after the DGMO call from Pakistan, all we have to do is we have to make it public, right? But that's not how it's operated, because it also has many sensitive details. And the DGMO level calls from Indian side also have always been recorded, but has never been publicly, released. So that was just a little distinction. So don't even expect that they would be released. And we have to really go by what the establishment tells us.
So, Swasti, Iran and Pakistan have signed major cooperation documents. Trade targets have been set at $10 billion. And based on that, our subscriber DPK5791 has a question that what are your views on three particular things? One is what Pakistan can export to Europe, the Baloch separatist movement and its impact. And third, what is the future and role of India in INSTC?
No, that's an interesting question, and thanks for asking me that question, because at least I'm getting a chance to speak about something other than Donald Trump. Okay, but it just needs a little bit of rectification. When you mentioned Europe, I mean, that connectivity, it's not about Europe actually, it's about Turkey. And Turkey is a major factor in supporting Pakistan these days. So anyway, coming back, this particular deal was signed a few days ago in Pakistan, when Pakistan and Iran have signed up for this, and they have taken a kind of a pledge to increase the bilateral trade to $10 billion. They say they signed about 12 MOUs on a range of topics. But I think what makes it interesting is that they also want to develop a connectivity kind of a corridor, starting from Pakistan going into into Iran, from Iran going into Turkey. That's one part. And from Turkey, they can go to Azerbaijan. Actually, from Iran also they can go to Azerbaijan. And from Azerbaijan, they can enter Russia. Because when they go to Turkey, then there is sea, that's Mediterranean Sea, right? So that is the part that actually should require better understanding in India. And what I often see is that in our obsession to sort of stand up to Donald Trump, we actually don't pay much attention to how really is the China-Russia bonhomie playing out against us, despite Russia being a historical partner, how this is playing out in current geopolitics when it comes to deepening ties with Turkey, comes to deepening ties with Pakistan, so on and so forth. So I think a couple of things we need to better understand that Pakistan actually has, if you look at the location of Pakistan, it is at the strategic crossroads of South Asia, Central Asia, Middle East, and
Right.
Pakistan has always been able to somewhere maximize that that positionality, in the sense that maximize returns to that positionality, trying to play all sides very successfully. Now, just I'll tell you a little bit about Pakistan, Russia. Let's start from there, because that is the point and that is the topic which is hardly talked about. How is the Pakistan angle developing with respect to Russia, with respect to China? In India, the only angle that we'll end up studying is Pakistan's developing linkages with China. Okay, we never study Pakistan's linkages with Russia. We don't study enough Pakistan linkages with Central Asia, with Pakistan linkages with Turkey, and so on and so forth. So let me just start with Pakistan, Russia. Even though they have not been historical partners, but lot has changed after Russia's war in Ukraine. And in fact, one of the major fallouts of the war is, from India's perspective, there are some, and I keep talking about them. One is that Russia really cannot play a bigger role in our defense ecosystem anymore because of its preoccupation with the war in Ukraine. Russia cannot really supply weapons anymore to its other allies, whether it was Iran, whether it was Assad, or whether it was Armenia or Azerbaijan, etc. So you do see that kind of a vacuum. So that has been one problem. The other problem, and on the contrary, now we see Russia becoming more important in the energy security sector. So that's been one change. The other has been about Russia getting pushed with China, regardless of whether it wins or loses in Ukraine. I mean, that's not our problem. That's not really our headache. In the process, Russia is getting pushed with China. And Russia getting pushed with China, and then China supporting the way it is, supporting Pakistan, which was very evident after Operation Sindoor, we do see that it is also this particular convergence that is playing out I would say to the advantage of Pakistan, okay? And one of the ways in which you can understand how Pakistan-Russia cooperation is evolving is when you look at a lot of publications from the Valdai Club. Now, Valdai Club is a Moscow-based think tank, and that's where I went when I wanted to find out what is going on, and obviously not to Pakistani think tanks, which will probably not yield the same kind of results that we want to see. But if you go there, you will see how this dragon-bear equation, this China-Russia equation, is playing to Pakistan's advantage. And that is why you will see, for example, you will see articles on how by mid-2023, the Pakistani and the Russian side had started to sort of materialize their discussions into agreements. Russia started supplying Pakistan with crude oil. In fact, there is no comparison between the volumes that we import versus the volumes that Pakistan is getting. But then there is no comparison between our economy and Pakistan's economy anyway. But you did see that happening. Also, all these talks that started in 2023 culminated in MOUs, and a very comprehensive MOU was signed in September 2024, which covered areas such as energy, trade, and defense cooperation. And just to add, and it's available at on the Valdai Club website, so you can go and read it for yourself. And not just that, in October 2024, Moscow hosted the inaugural Pakistan-Russia Trade and Investment Forum, and it was at that event where over 70 Pakistani business leaders, as well as representatives from more than 100 Russian companies, were present and talking. So to assume, right, that Russia is only deepening ties, is interested in India in this region as a bulwark against United States, or not falling into the lap of China, it's just half the story, because geopolitics keeps changing. And if we don't update our lens of understanding what is happening in the world, we remain a prisoner to history, and we also remain very susceptible to coming to wrong conclusions. And I think this is one situation that we should study more carefully. By linking China, Russia, Central Asia, the 5 republics of Central Asia, and Iran, Pakistan becomes a pivotal bridge between Eurasia's continental expanse and the southern maritime vector through the Gwadar port. So that is what is playing out in their favor, that we need to study better. And if you recall, I cannot recall any discussion on these things in recent times. In fact, Pakistan, Turkey, we started to study only after Operation Sindoor. Otherwise, we had no clue that 150 Pakistani engineers were developing the Turkish Khan project. Now, please remember, Pakistan also has key, projects with the Central Asians. I have noted a few down for you. There is something called a Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation transport corridors, which extend to Pakistan's ports. Okay, and obviously, India is nowhere in the picture here. So this is one. Then there are other quadrilateral agreements, basically that are secondary agreements to support this connectivity, different connectivity projects between Pakistan and Central Asia. I'm sure you all have heard about TAPI, the TAPI pipeline, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline that has really not been able to work because Pakistan-India problem. So what these guys have done is that they have something else to substitute it with, which is called Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. So you take India out and you bring in more Central Asian republics in, and that is an electricity transmission project to improve energy trade, etc. As far as Turkey is concerned, we keep hearing about the defense industry cooperation. We keep hearing about, how Turkey is propping up Pakistan with respect to drones. So when it comes to Turkey, it goes beyond simply the defense industry cooperation, because Pakistan and Turkey merely a few days ago, I think just not more than 4-5 days ago, they have launched a first SEZ, a special economic zone in Karachi. And they have revived the ITI rail. They have also, and basically all this is to deepen the Turkish business penetration into Pakistan, and this comes at a time when their defense industry ties are anyway very, very robust. Okay, I told you, it took us an Operation Sindoor to actually get into the details of what really is Pakistan's indispensability for Turkish defense industry, right? We used to always operate in the paradigm thinking that Pakistan is simply dependent on Turkey, but Pakistan has also made itself indispensable to many of these projects, and that was the whole point. So the other thing that we need to just keep in mind is that with Pakistan doing all of this, remember that all these countries are closer to China as well. And in that sense, it becomes much easier for Pakistan, Russia, whatever, China, all these countries to really sort of engage in yuan, because China is pretty much a big actor in Pakistan's economic scenario. And that is something which is radically different for us in India. And that is also one factor which is pushing them together without us realizing. So we need to study this before. I'm not raising an alarm here. All I'm saying is that we as analysts spend way too much time deconstructing statement after statement of Donald Trump's post on Truth Social, but we do not really study this enough, and I think we should be studying this enough. Now, last point is that if you compare it to INSTC, the one, and you can look at the image also, the one advantage that this particular connectivity project seems to have is that it's completely over land, which means that it starts from Pakistan and gets into Iran. It doesn't have to go to the sea for that. From there, it can go to Turkey, again overland. From Turkey or from Iran, it can go to Azerbaijan, again overland, because Iran and Azerbaijan also share a border. From Azerbaijan, it can go into Russia, which is again overland. So it is not having to face the same logistics problems of multimodal connectivity, where one part of it is in sea, then some part is on the land, then some part is again on the sea, which is a very, very fundamental problem with a project like IMEC.
Right.
But coming back to INSTC and to your question, it does create stress for INSTC, because from India's perspective, we are not able to trade much with Iran and with Russia because our bigger trading partners are all with the West, okay? And therefore, we are always wary of secondary sanctions. This is a mess right now. This is exactly the kind of situation we are navigating. From Pakistan's perspective, the kind of economic penetration that China already has, the kind of economic penetration, defense industry penetration that Turkey already has, kind of eases the way out for them for this overland corridor. Right now, it has not started to work. We will see when it starts to work, how really it performs. But for sure, if you're only asking me to compare the two, the way things are right now, one is a multimodal corridor and another seems to be a completely overlapped corridor.
With that, Swasti, we come to an end of this episode. Dear viewers, please stay tuned for the next episode and we look forward to your questions. Thank you.